Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's in-person and online program titled The Deserts of California, a California Field Atlas. Thank you for joining us here in San Francisco and in the virtual world. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and host the webinar this evening. Tonight, we have more than 35 people registered to join us in person, and 110 people registered to join us on Zoom. So for those of you that are new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition, finely made books. So if you're here in the club rooms, you can see those over there on the wall to my right, to your left. We publish a scholarly journal called the Quarterly Newsletter and keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of programs and exhibitions like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, the benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members and our donors. So you can find out more about the book club and membership by going online at bccbooks.org. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. Again, the program is titled The Deserts of California, a California Field Atlas. And our presenter is author, illustrator, and naturalist, Obi Kaufmann. Obi Kaufmann is an award-winning author of many best-selling books on California's ecology, biodiversity, and geography, including the California Field Atlas, which came out in 2017, The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Natural Resource from 2019, and The Forests of California, a California Field Atlas in 2020, then The Coasts of California, another California Field Atlas 2022, and now the final chapter of his California Field Atlas trilogy, The Deserts of California, a California Field Atlas, which just came out this month. In his work, Obi Kaufmann explores the transformation of California's resource landscape from its ancient origins through its modern challenges to its future possibilities. He uses his paintings, hand-drawn maps, and other data to present the story of how we learn from the deep past to uncover the truth about all possible futures. A lifelong resident of California, Obi Kaufmann makes his home in Oakland. His essays and paintings have been published in Dark Mountain Literary Journal, Ziziva Literary Journal, Bay Nature Magazine, Western Art and Architecture, Sunset Magazine, and On the Range Magazine, among others. He regularly posts his work on Instagram at Coyote Thunder. Now tonight, as I said, Obi will talk about the final chapter of his California Field Atlas trilogy, The Deserts of California, a California Field Atlas. And he does have copies of almost all of his books here. If you're interested, you can come up at the end and acquire one of his many publications. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom. We're going to have time towards the end of the presentation to take questions, and we'll do that from the chat and the Q&A on Zoom, and we'll also take questions from you here in the club rooms. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, again, author, illustrator, and naturalist, Obi Kaufmann.
All right. Okay, good.
Your camera's over here, my friend.
Okay, thank you. So I'm standing over there.
It'd be great if you would stand here, and also your clicker.
I thought it was mobile.
I know.
I stalk the stage.
You
just
can't
like,
be-
just like work through some of these thoughts.
You can't be reined in, I'm sorry, but
Okay,
we
very
have to
good.
rein you in a little bit.
Alrighty.
There you
Gonna
go.
have to put my analog notes on top of the digital machine. Just point of clarification there, Kevin. Thank you for that very warm introduction. I really appreciate it. The title of my second book, The State of Water, was Understanding California's Most Precious Resource. Nature has nothing to do with that, actually. It's an adjective. Understanding California's most precious resource. And I'm being so specific in my vocabulary there, or my omitted vocabulary, in order to make a very important point. As I wrote that book, of course, the subtitle suggests that the liquid stuff itself, water, is our most precious resource. But as I toured the state, in many other counties other than San Francisco, shall we say, San Bernardino County or Fresno County, to the farmers associations and whatnot, delivering them a particular bent, a specific bent to the story of water in California, specifically storage, conveyance, and usage among the different sectors, and in greater respect to the surface ecology or riverine and riparian habitat types. I came to the realization that it wasn't water itself, the liquid stuff, that was our most precious resource, but the ability to trust each other with a story at all. And now, by way of introduction to what I am going to present tonight, my fuzzy and my feeding back. No, I'm all right. Okay, so I've encountered some resistance recently from the left side of things, shall we say, and I want to address that to make my point as clear as I can, and to address it with great care and respect for these types of comments. And I want to bring them out here as we talk about, for example, the criticism of my positivity potentially being a toxic agent. As perhaps counterintuitive as that sounds, I think that I understand that there is a criticism there that perhaps it comes from hanging out with politicians and administrators in San Francisco, which I seem to have been doing a lot more of lately. I'm really humbled to report. Among those people, solutions are on the table, and we can work together to find them, to sort of navigate this bottleneck of stressors, if you will. But to a great deal of people who are dealing with the very real thing that is climate anxiety or climate trauma, we are to suggest that you will be okay is maybe to suggest that I am denying what you are feeling right now. And I understand that. In another criticism of my work, I've heard it recently said that my incessant rationalism may be patriarchal in origin and in effect. That moving towards this ever precise epistemology, right? Epistemology is how we commonly decide what is true. I've chosen rationalism. Well, perhaps I didn't choose anything. There's a lot of talk about free will in the news these days. Perhaps I didn't choose anything. Both my parents were scientists. I grew up with this way of thinking. I guess what I'm doing here by starting this talk off over the next 45 minutes or so as I meander through my thought processes to eventually come to, this corpus of text and painting is to not apologize necessarily for my perspective. I am me, right? I think that there would be following from that patriarchal notion of my incessant rationalism, we have something like the science itself may be arrogant in the way it denies other worldviews. As if I am somehow advocating for the impossibility of the solutions out of these problems through this ecological bottleneck that presents itself in the 21st century, and the emerging Anthropocene, as it's called, might be found in the same processes that got us into these problems. Another paradigm distinction that I appreciate and really want to respect and never condescend to. It really turns up a lot in issues of spirituality, which I am happy to address, happy to thematically present as a piece of the larger aesthetic theory that I am exploring philosophically. Again, I said I was born without any religion in my life. So what spirituality is something largely anathema to my personal experience. I think that I understand it at particular moments when I am deep in the wilderness experience, the experience so far away from, or it might be my backyard, where I experience the nature of infinite relationships through different aspects of the living biosphere, how everything is intimately and inextricably interconnected with every other thing, perhaps throughout the cosmos. And that feeling inside of me approaches something that I can understand like spiritual. So yes, assuming that the answers exist. Yeah, tonight's talk is called The Deserts of California. I really have to present to you all a real sort of holistic view of the larger trajectory of my work and where it has gone in the past 10 years. When I was in 2015, I wrote that tattered book there in the middle, the California Field Atlas, anticipating a much different world over the next 10 years. What a lesson in unexpected phenomena that turned out to be. But nonetheless, I believe that I built a structure, I invented a genre, so to say, that called the Field Atlas, in order to tell a particular story describing a particular character of California's more than human world. And ultimately what that might be, or the purpose of such a thing, then I come to again and again, is how to ever be more from this place. I was born here, I was educated here, I cut my teeth as a young naturalist on Mount Diablo right across the water. And yet, my mind is colonized. My mind is taken with so many resources that were given to me that I have the luxury of considering a larger context. And because of that great responsibility and that right, in the artistic context, it's the thought that gets me up out of bed every day. Got to get to work. I've been pushing out a book every 18 months or so, and that means 7 days a week. This is where my heart is. This is what I know. This is where my passion is. And yet, when I say that I know it, I believe I might be being glib, because part of my vision, of course, is to then disarm what it is to be an expert at all. And what I mean by that is that, well, for example, I'm not writing textbooks, okay? I'm not going to leave you alone with this knowledge. I'm going to invite you rather to come on this journey. In fact, the first line of my latest book, The Deserts of California, is that this is an adventure story. And in order to do that, I've had to come up with a very specific philosophy about the quality of my voice and the nature of the language that I use. So here we are in the desert. The desert, what a hyper object it is, to use a neologism by the philosopher Timothy Morton. This thing that can't be comprehended all at once. Politically, it's within California, but really it's another world. Outside the California floristic province, okay, as it might be known ecologically. On the other side of the Sierra Crest, the California floristic province is a region known for its common climate and ecological habitat types that extends from Baja up to Oregon. And within that ecological island, really, which is framed by the Pacific to the west and the Sierra Crest to the east, we have a world-class portfolio of biodiversity, where, for example, vascular plants in the California floristic province number about 6,800. In the rest of, a third of those only live here. In the rest of the North American botanical province, the number is about 4,400. Like, even though California floristic province is only 4% of the entire geography of North America. The deserts are a different thing, a different floristic province. You might imagine, pretty obviously, a different climatic standard average mean. And still, yet the thrust of my book really is the discussion of land management. I think to most, the deserts are considered a resource of space and little else. Exploitable and perhaps even empty of meaning, whatever we might mean by meaning. In my case, I would say meaning would be following causalities, both personal, cultural, and ecological, all the way down to the ground. So California, what is California to me? California is a metaphor. You'll see 3 books up there. The book on the far right was one of my father's books. He wrote like 18 books. William John Kaufmann's son was going to be a mathematician. And so that is my, turned out to be a painter. And a wanderer in the woods. My father, the astrophysicist, used the universe as his metaphor, this basket large enough to hold his philosophies of how humans interrelate to the fabric of reality itself. For me, I use the metaphor of California to do so. I remember riding in the car one day, probably about 10 years old. My father was driving, my mother was in the passenger seat, and I was in the back in the middle. And I remember maybe a particularly inquisitive moment, and I said, I wonder where truth is hidden in the universe, fundamentally, right? 10-year-old question. And just like that, my father said physics and my mother said psychology, which is their 2 respective disciplines. So yes, thank you for laughing. We still laugh about that to this day. I think if my adult self had been sitting there next to the child that was me, and I had an answer, I think that it would have taken me a second, but I would have said story. What is the story we're telling ourselves about who we are, where we are, what we're doing, and why we're doing it? And this transcends argument. So at any point tonight, as we go forward, and I guess this would conclude the introduction a little bit, as I said, suggest that trigger warning as I will be discussing the end of the world, or rather how the world will not end, and other matters which I don't find gloomy at all. I encourage you to walk with me through this bigger journey of deciphering who we are, and what it is we think that we might be doing in a larger ecological biospheric context across deep time. You can almost imagine that here we are in the 21st century on a mountain peak. You can imagine like all humanity symbolized by like one pair of eyes on top of this mountain peak, and the mountain peak represents a metaphor for the earth in the field of history. So that's that little red triangle there in this diagram, and we're standing on the top, all humanity standing on the top. And we can look to, let's call it the east, look to the east, and you can look towards all around us is a time shed, entire time shed of life on earth. You can look back almost 4 billion years ago to the east, to the sun rising, to life rising on planet Earth over the biosphere. And then you can turn to the west and you can look to see, as 3.8 billion years ago, you can look to the west and see sunset on all life on planet Earth as the core of our sun shrinks and brightens on its own pathway of solar evolution to evaporate all the oceans and finally destroy all bacterial life on terrestrial Earth and ending life. That too is about the same distance away, 3.8 billion years. Now, I suggest and I posit that like you can kind of look down this mountain at from any view, from any vantage, and see similar things in the future and the past as we look to say 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago, when we saw a California with a much different ecological profile than we do today, incredibly different biogeographical topography, completely different data set than what we find today. But you fast forward 10,000 years, and you might find something that is rewilded, something that is perhaps after the cities of the humans have turned into something else, after we have turned them into something else, or they've been turned into something else for us. Or it allows me to also say things like in my book on water, for example, that what we've done with the waterscape in California, the most altered aspect of our natural topography, what we've done with water in California rivals anything humans have done with anything anywhere at any time. That great achievement will only be met by how it again transforms in the next 100 years. However it does, with the advent of global warming by way of anthropogenic, let's call it climate breakdown by way of anthropogenic global warming. It's a better way to put it. So what is the field atlas then, and what character of California am I describing? Well, it's the one, it's kind of sort of funny for a thing calling itself an atlas. I'm not really concerned with the where of things. I'm more concerned with the configuration of the how of things. This is a map from the Deserts book of the 185 miles of the Amargosa River. This line here is the border of Nevada and California. And this beautiful river that has been flowing there 2.5 million years since really the early days of the Pleistocene. 125 miles of this river flows underground. At least 50 species, endemic species, from songbirds to tiny mammals, live nowhere else but in the watershed of the Amargosa River. And those aspects of California that have always been 2.5 million years is probably half the time span of that you would actually like be able to geographically recognize California in its modern tectonic configuration. California, as you might recognize it, it's about 6 to 10 million years old, middle Miocene. Those aspects of California that have always been, continue to be, and always will be, despite the so successfully imposed urban veneer we put on it since 170 years ago. Now, I don't have any roads in my book. Again, if you want a road atlas, go get a road atlas. I don't tell you how to get anywhere, and I play a lot with scale, declination, and identity of these geographies. And I throw a lot of poetry in there too. So for example, this is a map in the upper left-hand corner of the Mojave Desert. And you'll see that by this rather arbitrary line from the Colorado River to Lake Tahoe, we ecologically cut the Mojave in half. So the deserts of California, I give the conceit, the political conceit that is this area, right? This is actually a map of the 4 deserts. We've got the Colorado, the Sonora, the Mojave, and the Great Basin, or at least that's how I define them in the book. There is some debate exactly as to whether or not the Colorado should be a different desert than classified ecologically as a different desert than the Sonoran Desert, but I believe that it absolutely should, given its vastly different appearance, including the lack of saguaro cacti. In any case, so we had the past, we have the present, right? So I guess I want to make the point too about the Mojave. This is a modern ecological entity. Okay, biogeographically, the Mojave Desert isn't really more than 5,000 years old. And I like that idea. The rivers are older than the land. That even the mammals, the tiny Armagosa vole is older than the land itself. There's meaning, there's poetry, and there's also this wisdom that comes from this changing environment, this quickly changing environment. And so when we mourn the York fire, when we mourn the Dome fire, I'll tell you about all those things in just a minute here, because we're going to talk about fire a little bit. And the changing quality of the biodiversity found on the land throughout our arid regions. What we're mourning is human. And it's very important to feel that, but also to recognize that in the great comfort of deep time, there are other truths that are revealed. For example, this is a map of California 10 million years from now. When given the regular conveyance of the San Andreas Fault, the peninsula of Baja will become the island of Baja, and Los Angeles will be a suburb of San Francisco, of the archipelago of San Francisco. And now, given what we know about island biogeography and the way that speciation and biodiversity actually occur, the biodiversity that we will find on that immense island of Baja, isolated as it will have been for millions of years, is a portfolio of organisms that we cannot possibly imagine. Will placental mammals even be a thing? When you consider how, after the world recovers from its sixth mass extinction, already dreaming about what the 7th mass extinction will be like, what ecological niches, evolutionary niches will be revealed, such that entirely new structures of organisms can exploit them and do what they do in their own future ecologies. So now to get back to the burning now, the burning here, the burning right now. I've done 5 books now, and I'm so excited to report that Deserts of California just debuted number 10 in San Francisco Chronicles nonfiction bestseller. So that's really exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you. I would like to give all of that though to the electric citizenry of California. There is a thirst for a different kind of story to be told. I really hope that my books, even given my, as I say, my own particular economic background, I'm able to afford a small apartment in Oakland, or given my sexual orientation, or my gender identity, or my racial configuration, or any of these things that I've been handed, that I might lend a common voice right now in order to make some things clear about the nature of justice, especially indigenous justice, which I'm very close to. I do a monthly podcast with Greg Saris, who's the chairman of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria, and he and I sit down for once a month and talk to wonderful writers, including, or we talk to wonderful people in general. We talk, like, well, last guest was Rebecca Solnit, and the guest before that was our Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, who's become a good friend. So we, the conversation is churning. It is, and I think what we get together and decide collectively in the podcast, that it's called Place and Purpose, by the way, is that we're not doomers. Okay, so a doomer might say something like, and I hear this often, humans are the problem. If only we had less humans. If only we had less humans. The thing called nature, or Mother Earth, or Gaia, might repair herself. Maybe. But I think there's a lot of psychology at work there, maladaptive psychology. I think there's a lot of self-hatred there. I think there's a lot of guilt there that might be clouding some judgment, and maybe even presenting some paradoxes in philosophy, or some contradictions in a philosophic statement, like exactly what nature is. We are as much a dream of the earth as anything else. My next book, my 6th book, is going to be called The State of Fire: Understanding Where, How, and Why California Burns. And it's funny now that the largest fire this year was the York Fire in the Eastern Mojave National Preserve on the border of Nevada, burning nearly 100,000 acres outside of a natural burn regime. Now, remember we were talking about the California floristic province before. Every arboreal habitat within the CFP has a strategy. It's either adapted to or even dependent upon the natural return index of fire on the land. And it could be small, it could be very, very large. Native fires, totally normal throughout the Holocene. In fact, California continues to go through the California floristic province continues to go through a major fire deficit, especially in its northern forests. Under indigenous fire regimes across California, it's estimated that about 6 million to 10 million fires a year burned. 6 million to 10 million acres of fire a year burned. And in 2020, when we had 4 million, it felt like California was burning through and through. Totally different character of fires. I know tonight's lecture is not about fires. Tonight's lecture is about many things, including original characters of California. Why biodiversity, for example? Why should I care about X, Y, or Z plant, animal, invertebrate, lichen, fungus? Why should I care if it exists or not? Well, it's a very good question. And I think probably the best answer is just as vague, probably just as boneheaded, but I think the best answer is something like this. There's this through line of math that goes straight, math like logic, goes straight, like this transitive property gets carried through these different entities, like healthy ecosystems. Okay, so biodiversity makes healthy ecosystems. Healthy ecosystems deliver regular ecological services. Ecological services inform every aspect of human industry and culture since the beginning of time, and forever they shall. Okay, so it is as if we're dealing with a Jenga tower, and we're assuming we know how the blocks are stacked. But again, this is an assumption. The adaptive cycle, which is what this is a core feature to understanding my books, to understanding ecology in California, and to understanding the nature of how we need to strategize a future plan of incorporating these endemic systems of earth, air, fire, and water. The clock is always ticking. Every homeostatic ecosystem always wants this wheel to regularly turn. And it seems to me a tenet of what Wendell Berry called industrial fundamentalism is to stop the wheel. Stop the wheel with monoculture agriculture, for example. Stop the wheel by dictating all circumstances by which any regime, be it water or fire, actually exists on the land. That is a prescription for disaster, ultimately. This is a very impossible to read image. 30 by 30, California. Okay, so 2 weeks ago, it got passed into state law, moving from executive order to state law, that we will be protecting 30% of our lands and coastal waters by the year 2030. And this is a very rigid classification. Okay, this isn't the national forests. National forests cover almost half of California, land of many uses, right? It doesn't qualify for 30 by 30. 30 by 30 is for the express purpose of protecting biodiversity. And what that amounts to, and what these graphs down here, you can go to coyoteandthunder.com and see these graphs better. Or you can get one of my books, they're in there too. The idea is to places where this adaptive cycle still exists. And you have to remember that throughout the Holocene, it's all been done by the human hand here in California. Hundreds of thousands of indigenous Californians have been stewarding every acre of this landscape for thousands of years. And to deny that truth is to just not understand what you're looking at in California. So to return to that kind of like tribal stewardship, and I'm so glad the state is now, even in the past 5 years, tribal communications in Sacramento is completely transformed, utterly transformed. Tribal scientists, tribal leaders have a seat at the table now and a prominent voice in how this goes forward. There's a lot of traditional ecological knowledge to be learned and had. TEK, the other tech. So the deserts are doing a lot of heavy lifting. You see that, you know, by my map that I showed you earlier, deserts are doing nearly half of the work so far in the 30 by 30 plan. Half of and they're only 25% of total of California, right? So the math is off, and that, you know, it's 30 by 30. We need about 5 million more acres, so we're at about 24.5 million acres right now, protected to these stringent guidelines. Um, 30 by 30 has some problems. I think the big one probably is like we do it and like, yay, it's January 1st, 2030, and we've saved 30%, and everybody's like, hey, we saved nature. It must be a base. Perhaps it's something like E.O. Wilson calls it a 50 by 50. But Joe Biden's very excited about California's leadership in this, and he's suggesting a national 30 by 30. It's a harder fight. Californians are ready for this kind of legislation. And gosh, you know, like Edward Abbey said, there's reality and then there's California. You know, it's like you just think about like 1/3 of our government, our federal government's just been stalled for weeks, and yet California just keeps passing laws and doing what they do, moving forward from an age of progress into an age of resiliency. And I think that we can get back to that in a minute. But now let's talk about art, because we got to talk about art for a second. What am I doing with art? Okay, so I spent my college years skipping class at UC Santa Barbara and going up into the mountains and searching for Chumash rock art sites. And I have no idea what I was looking at, and a lot of that narrative has been lost, but it's being rebuilt by a resurgent Chumash nation. But what I did understand there, and it really influenced me, people ask me like, who are your favorite artists and that stuff? It's like, well, we don't know their names. The Chumash are the painters of California. Incredibly large murals. I encourage you to check it out and to be wowed and awed by how mysterious it is, among other things. I don't know what I was looking at, but what I knew I was looking at was like, oh, here's a human artist who's communicating cultural truths about the community's relationship to nature. Like, oh, hey, that's what I do.
What are you showing there?
What am I showing there? Oh, okay. This is the top one is a photograph, right? And that's a photograph of one of these Chumash rock art paintings. Okay, so that might have been painted 500 years ago. And you can see like the sun mandala there, and you sort of see a vague figure with some lines and that kind of thing. And a lot of it's been eroded, but there are others that are like 30 feet long, and it looks like maybe a condor-like figure with maybe a human leg and maybe a centipede or something like that coming off of that. Like the exact semiotics are extremely culturally specific. Like, I wonder if I showed that Chumash artist like one of my paintings, right? Or how about this, one of my maps?
Yeah.
No, I mean, there'd be no way of, like, the cultural divide is so deep. Like I make my books in a very specific cultural lexicon, really, right? And I sort of rely on you to do a lot of the work, really, right? So this is from my new book. I have 72 maps of the 72 different wilderness areas in across the 4 deserts. And this is one of them, right? Celebrating the so I was talking before about like the philosophical construct that my work is embedded in, and that's really got 3 pillars, right? This complexity theory of how ecologies form across this dancing this matrix of dancing variables, this idea of like an aesthetic theory of like what beauty might be and how that corresponds to how we understand things, and then maybe we've got like a consilient idea, and that's the idea of breaking down these academic silos to almost have, in ecology it's called an edge effect, where at the ecotone of, say, like a forest and a meadow, you at that thin sliver of habitat, you have more biodiversity than in the forest or in the meadow by itself. So there's a greater abundance of approachable knowledge. E.O. Wilson, in his book Consilience, you saw a slide of it before, called it the unity of knowledge, these 2 great schools of human thought between the physical sciences and the humanities. He famously said, when the aliens come, they are not going to be really interested in our sciences. It's like, oh yeah, we got all that figured out.
Yeah.
What they're going to be really interested in exploring and understanding is the thing that makes us unique in all of the universe, which is our humanities. And that system that arose over the past 70,000 years since the cognitive revolution, really, that makes us who we are today. And who are we today? I think a lot about the history of science, especially in the past 60 years, as we are now changing the story so quickly. And this now, now that we all have Greta Thunberg in our hearts and in our faces, and everything that she represents, there's almost an aspect to the conversation that I believe is missing, and that's how fast the story is changing. When we hear from the children, with their panicked eyes and their clenched fists that it's not happening fast enough, I'd like to remind them how fast it actually is happening. That in 1968, Robert MacArthur and E.O. Wilson wrote Theory of Island Biogeography, which was the first time we ever had like a real working notion of speciation, for example, how ecologies make species. You know, Darwin's book on the origin of species did not actually describe the origin of species. He described, you know, natural selection, evolution by means of natural selection, but speciation, especially in a landscape, was not touched in any sort of ecological, mathematical manner. And it was those kinds of books in the 60s and 70s, those kind of discoveries that, I mean, that was 68. I mean, we knew about DNA for already 15 years now. We had no idea about what ecology is, right? Or when you think about justice in California, we think about fire justice in California. You think about the big burn of 1913, which really changed American policy towards fire in the West, specifically when 4 million acres went up in 24 hours along the border of Canada because of trains. The thinking then from United States Forest Service first director Gifford Pinchot said, who was trained in forestry in France, the science of the day was repress fire enough and it will go away. Yeah, right. That was science, but the story is changing. I feel like we could use some more young geniuses. We could use some more ecologists. The door is wide open. What we don't know dwarfs what we do. Could use another couple of Darwins. I can see her figuring something out like the mathematics, for example, behind connectivity and cooperation in an ecosystem, as opposed to something like Tennyson's tooth and claw as it is writ. But then again, I'm going to stick to my lanes, and I'm just going to hang out with Shelley and say that poets are the unacknowledged legislators. Science quickly influences legislation. You think of how fast things changed in the 70s, in the golden age of environmental legislation. We think from the Clean Water Act to the Clean Air Act to the Endangered Species Act, passing with 98% of Congress. That's a good story. That's not a better argument. And that's the good story right there, at least one of them that was being told. The real reason why people's minds change. So this is what we've got in the desert today. I like this map. My publisher was like, it was really sketchy, Obi. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of the point. The Desert Resources Energy Conservation Plan is the big law of the land down there right now, and it walks hand in hand with the 30 by 30 law and the mandate to make California carbon neutral by 2045. And part of that is very problematic. Are we trading nature? Are we spending nature to save nature? Right now we make all of the wind farms across the California desert, all of the solar farms across the California desert, and all the geothermal farms across the California desert together make about 7 megawatts a day. 2022, there was one day in summer where California broke all kinds of records and needed 53 megawatts. So the plan now is to get the desert in the next 7 years up to 20 megawatts per day, from 7 where it is now to 20 in the next 7 years across 250,000 acres of land. It's a tremendous area, just completely raised. Right, and these are solar panel farms. Solar panels don't have any recycle program, and their lifespan's about 45 years. And they are really reliant on the mining of heavy metals, including cobalt, And, but that's another story. That is a terribly nefarious supply chain down to the bottom there. But we need to keep this in mind as we go forward, especially in the democratic context. It's very important to me what a democracy is. I've been challenged to define democracy. Is this a democracy? It's like, well, I don't know what a democracy is. Okay, fine. Is it functioning? Is it really democracy? I know that when I go and present my work at the Farmers Association Fresno, and I'm treated well, and there is a good rapport, there is a lot of respect. I'm not dismissed as some painter, some artist from San Francisco, but rather a fellow citizen, sometimes the loyal opposition. How about that idea? What an antiquated notion. In any case, these are incredibly important designs to keep in perspective. Perhaps one of the more important ideas in my book about the perilous trajectory toward simplification, especially in terms of biodiversity. It remains my contention. Here's the hope piece. That while every single one of our natural landscape types in California, every single one of them are either threatened, endangered, or critically endangered, we have a very low extinction rate. It's less than 1%. I mean, sure, we've lost some of the beautiful megafaunal creatures, including the California grizzly I showed you there before. Beautiful animal who we're commemorating 100 years to the year today when the last one was seen in Sierra National Forest. 1923. It's my contention that given that all the pieces are still on the board in that regard, never mind the extinction threat, because we're dealing with that as best we can, there is a trajectory forward by which we leave the 21st century, with California in better shape than we left it at the end of the 20th century. I mean, I remember when I was backpacking as a young man in the 80s in Big Sur Mountains, no whales, there were no elk, there were no otter, there were no Indians, there was no white-tailed American kite, there's no peregrine falcons, it can go on. All of these species have returned. I thought nature was something that I missed. Turns out, give it half a chance and it resurges. Involved with a lot of great projects right now. We have as many points of hope as we do despair. And just touching on that idea, I said complexity theory earlier, and I want to close with this idea, this idea that there is just as likely a mathematical chance of us tipping towards what we could call catastrophic success as there is towards catastrophic failure. And for the first time in human history, the godlike power that we exhibit across the biosphere has the nimbleness and the technology and even the agency to do the right thing. And doing the right thing, it's not going to happen in the next couple of decades. This bottleneck is not going to last that long. Bottlenecks, by definition, open up as we move, as I say, from the era of progress and the lies that represents to an era of resilience, past these bottlenecks, where we get this story right and we do it together. That's
catastrophic. What?
Catastrophic success, as opposed to catastrophic failure.
Oh,
right? Because we're dealing with a matrix of variables, right? And it could go this way and it could go that way. When all complex systems have in common is emergent phenomena. What's going to happen? So that catastrophic success might be emergent phenomena from something we don't know. As it turns out, 75% of all coal plants on the planet have either been decommissioned or they are not, and those that were planned to be built are not being built over the past 10 years. And because of that, it looks like we're going to avoid the 4 degrees by 8 to 8 degrees, that threshold of intense catastrophe that IPCC said that was the big danger. So we've avoided that. 3 degrees is way too much, but we've avoided the worst possibility of hellscape, for example. In any case, that's one specific example of a emergent phenomena in a complex system. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your attention today.
You left us with catastrophic success.
Yeah.
Catastrophic failure.
Yes.
Oh, success.
Go success.
It's only
right?
3%. That's kind of success.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, so we do have some time for some questions. So we'll take a couple here in the club.
Yes, sir.
We've heard you before. This is what we do a lot with printing.
Thank you so much for having me back.
Could you speak up, please?
Handwriting. I'll repeat the
Okay,
question.
okay.
What I'd like you to address based on your work.
Oh, thank you.
How did you develop your handwriting?
Oh, yeah.
And how did you see it function? So for instance, I saw a little bit of typing, but it appears, and it's an old tradition probably of naturalists, and in fact, these might be seen as printed versions of notebooks.
Yeah,
But
sure.
can you kind of talk about, just from the base level, I'm not myself really a calligrapher, I have a terrible bit of handwriting.
Oh,
But I
right.
have a deep appreciation of all that stuff. Did you study calligraphy?
So the question is about
Yeah, sure.
my handwriting. Yes,
Did you
I
study calligraphy?
no. I'm a kind of a ravenous autodidact. Right. You know, I'm you know what it is? The questions about my calligraphy and how it ties to art and notebooks and that kind of thing. I, from a very young age, was absolutely in love with Tolkien's Middle Earth.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that, you know, it influenced my philosophy a bit too. I mean, here he was writing these between World War I and World War II, when there was no real hope, you know, across Western civilization that this was going to turn out well at all. I mean, you know, and I think like he invented this word, eucatastrophe. A eucatastrophe is something that happens that like finally it's actually an emergent phenomenon. It's something that finally turns the tide at the last minute towards the good, especially in fairy tales. And so his book ends with one. But I think that those books, the Lord of the Rings books, are just like, you know, there's little hope throughout those books. And I think that's a very measured and interesting philosophy that has influenced me. And when I was young, I was really into Elvish, you know, and so that flowing thing has followed me all the way through that. And also followed me into these books, right? So when I originally pitched the idea for these books to my publisher, I showed that picture of you know, Tolkien's Middle Earth, the trees over here and the mountains over here and that kind of thing. Like I can do that for a place with more adventure, more romance, more exciting, more beauty, and it actually exists. Yes, sir.
What is a catastrophic success?
What does that look like?
Yes.
We don't know.
Man,
We don't know.
Well, I mean, what does it look like? Well, it looks like just this year for the first time, just 35 miles from here, a fusion reaction was successfully maintained inside of a human-made reactor. That they actually harnessed the energy of the sun for what could be an equation that, when popularly applied across industry, means that we will never need another drop of energy again. That's a catastrophic success, right?
why is it catastrophic?
Oh, because it changes everything.
Yeah.
Changes the game.
Catastrophic sounds bad.
He's playing with the word catastrophe.
I am.
He's showing that it goes both.
In
ways.
fact, I just used the example of Tolkien's eucatastrophe.
Yes.
Yeah, so we could call it a catastrophe. Yes,
Where did your father work?
he was the director of the Griffith Observatory down in Hollywood for many years. And then he was an adjunct professor at SDSU, and he made textbooks for the rest of his life in Danville.
So
Where I
that
grew up.
would explain UC Santa Barbara.
Well, we moved from there. We moved up to Mount Diablo when I was 5 years old, and then I went to Santa Barbara. Only a 6-hour drive. Yes.
One last question, yeah.
Okay, just want to say thank you. I've got every single one of your books.
No kidding. That's wonderful to hear.
And
Thank
I've
you.
convinced a couple bookstores to carry them.
No kidding.
And
Wow.
a couple of my friends have bought them,
Thank you.
but I just wanted to actually hear you in person, and the books are really a joy and hard to understand both.
They're hard to understand. Yeah.
Sometimes,
Yeah,
so,
I hear you.
You just, your taxonomy and your artwork are just amazing.
Oh, thank you so much for sticking with it. I really appreciate your support.
Quick question?
Sure, one last question.
Where can we go to follow your thinking? Because it's so clear that you're philosophizing.
Right on. Yeah, totally. I appreciate you even your patience with me as I organically come up with these ideas right now. I don't like to do sound bites. I don't like to do practiced things. I do one social media really, and that's Instagram. And it's Coyote Thunder, named after that Barry Lopez.
And it's
Very
not just
local.
images, you'll put like some of your written thinking.
I
in
do,
it too.
yeah, I write paragraphs.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. Right on, thank you. And you can see my essays at coyoteandthunder.com.
Okay.
And you can go to californiafieldatlas.com to get there if you forget.
Okay, thanks.
Yes.
And then remind us about the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Or you can go to placeandpurpose.live. We're recording our next episode this Thursday with Carol Hart, who is a lands protection expert in Sonoma County. She will be the next chair of the California Coastal Commission, and she is a force, and she is wonderful. She's also the wife of drummer Mickey Hart from the day.
Wow. Mind blown.
Yeah.
That's great. So how about a big round of applause for our speaker?
Thank you all, friends. Thank you all.
And if you are here in the club rooms and you're interested in some of these books, please come up. They are for sale. Obi is ready to take your money.
I'm happy to take them up.
Happy to take your money. So, and thank you everyone for attending this Book Club of California program. Our next program is a virtual program on Monday, October 30th at 5 o'clock. It's virtual only, and it's titled The Poison Book Project: Arsenic and Other Heavy Metals in 19th Century Bookbinding. It's kind of our Halloween themed program, a little spooky there, the Poison Book Project. It's Dr. Rosie Grayburn, the head of Scientific Research and Analysis Lab at Winterthur Museum, Garden and Library, and also the founding co-chair of the Bibliotoxology Working Group. You can register for that program or in any program at bccbooks.org/programs or in any of the emails that you're getting from the book club. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have a wonderful night and get home safely. And if you're already home, congratulations, you're probably safe. Thanks.